Hello everyone, this is Prajna Joshi from Banaha. I welcome you, sir, for our BANAFEST Writers 2021. So could you just introduce yourself to our audience?
Hi, sure, yeah. Thank you very much for having me, first of all. My name's NOLAN. I was born in Canada. I'm a Canadian born and bred, and moved to India 2013. I've emigrated here full time now, and I'm a writer.
You moved to India after living in Toronto, Canada, if I'm right, for a long time.
That's correct.
How was the experience of moving from one place to another? How did you settle into India?
Interesting question. I lived in England for a while. I've traveled extensively, but moving to India to stay permanently was like moving to a different planet. To be honest, it was a whole host of new experiences. Just different attitudes, new ways of life. It was traumatic, I guess. But one I'm very comfortable with now and very glad that I've made.
You started off with a blog, Wandering Hippie, Saddlebag, Reflections and Rock and Roll. That is such a innovative title. So how was the experience with the blog?
Yeah, that was I've always fancied myself a writer. I've always been a storyteller. I guess that's just a sly way of saying I was always a class clown. But the blog was just a way. When I arrived in India, I was just being flooded with all these new experiences and all of these new sights and sounds and foods and places, and I needed some way to release it. So I started blogging. I'd never really considered blogging before. I'd always fancied myself a writer, and I'd been writing from a very young age. I'd never really looked at blogging as a platform to sort of release this pent up creativity, I suppose. And so I started that more just as a way to retell some travel logs of my experiences in India. And it took off. I got some real positive feedback, and to my surprise, the majority of my subscribers to the blog are Indian. I was expecting more support maybe from back home, from Canada, people just looking to learn a little bit more about the country. But to my surprise, the support's been mostly Indian.
Yeah. So I think that was the birth of your first book, Memoirs of a Motorcycle Madman. So did that take off from the blog itself?
That's correct. Yeah, it was that was just a collection of some of the more spicy encounters that I had while traveling through the country.
Yeah. So is it like a collection of short stories or a book about one story?
It's no, it's a collection of different. See, shortly after I arrived in India, I joined a motorcycle club, and I traveled extensively through India on motorcycle. Actually, I think there's only 3 or 4 states that I haven't ridden through at this point. Chances are, wherever you live, I've been there. I did a lot of miles the first few years I was here, and so yeah, my travel logs were basically just things that had happened, funny stories, not so funny stories, some trying times, things that had happened on these trips. So I put a collection of the more colorful ones together and released them in a book.
So like what was the difference between experiencing that stuff and writing it in a book? Like, did you face any problems while converting your imagination, adding in your imagination to your words, or just recording it in a book?
Well, that's a very good question. I've had a few of my friends who were with me on those rides reread the retellings of them and said, it's a little more colorful than I remember it happening, and I might have taken a bit of artistic license. I mean, it's called a memoir, but they're largely based on how I recall things happening. So I've never really had a problem sort of extrapolating bits and pieces of information and then embellishing it into how I actually felt at the time. So they might be a bit more flamboyant than what some people remember, but as far as pen to paper, it was quite easy for me just to relive those experiences.
I mean, that's just how every creative's mind works, with just extrapolating things into what we remember it as being. So,
Well,
yeah,
fiction's fiction, right? It's just a license to lie, really, isn't it?
yes, yes, definitely. So, you said you've been writing from a very young age. So, what was the catalyst that pushed you into being a writer? Like, what ignited that passion in you?
I write to get chicks, you know. I mean, novelists are the rock and roll stars of the literary world. That's my primary goal. No, actually, as I said earlier, I've always fancied myself a storyteller, and right from a very young age, I was an avid reader. I mean, my father was an avid reader, and he passed that down on to me. And I guess very early on, I saw the beauty and the mystery, uh, how the written word could transport you from, sitting on your couch or laying on your bed to some place that you'd never been, or experiencing something that you'd never done. And that fascinated me. I love that. And I guess through my early experiences with reading, I developed a fairly strong vocabulary, and with my nature, it just seemed the two went hand in hand. It was very easy to make that connection. I should write. And so I think those two things, just my nature for wanting to entertain, and the fact that my father was so heavily influenced me with reading, I think were the two contributing factors.
Yeah. So, what would you prefer to be? Like more of a writer or a reader? Which do you enjoy more, reading or writing?
I think they go hand in hand, really. You can't write without reading, and that's not to say because you're an avid reader that you can write or even have the desire to. Um, I enjoy both so much. I wouldn't ever want to be in the position where I could only do one or the other.
Yeah. So currently, you have also worked on a short story collection, Six Crates of Rags and Bones. Is That's
Yes.
another book you have already finished working on. So, what was the
Yeah.
difference between being a rookie writer, like writing your debut book, and then having some experience in the industry itself? How did that change you?
Oh, well, it's wonderful to be naive. When you first sit down, or at least when I first sat down and started to write, a collection of short stories. When I really started to dabble in fiction, I had these dreams of, how easy it would be to pull it all together, and how wonderful it would be to entertain people. Never really with an eye on thoughts of glory or fame or riches. Just more wanting to share uh, some of my twisted imagination with other people, and really entertain them. Um, once you've done that, you sort of realize that the industry is a little deeper. It's not an easy field to break into. Um, you can be poetic and dream of being a writer and writing the great Canadian novel or the great Indian novel, but the realities of that, are a little bit more harsh.
Yeah.
So I guess I might have, I don't like to say it, but I guess I've become maybe a little bit more cynical, um, as my career has moved on.
I think that goes hand in hand with any industry. Like once you get into the industry, you start to think of all the practical things instead of just focusing on being a writer, I guess.
Very true.
So I
Very
have a
true.
very personal question. How do you come up with the titles of your book? They're like so flamboyant and so beautiful. Like every book has such a great title. So how do you come up with a title? It's a very personal question.
Um, well, can I paraphrase Stephen King?
Yes, definitely.
My muse bird just sort of takes the shit on my head, to be honest. um, I tend to pull the titles out of something that I've written. I don't. I'll give something a working title, but it rarely lasts to the end of the project. It'll be a turn of a phrase or a key moment or something that just seems to encapsulate the entire feeling of that book. And it jumps out at me, to be honest. I don't give it much thought. Whatever mystic force there is that compels me to write is responsible for it. So I don't think about it too deeply. I just let it come.
Yeah, I think that's the like advantage of being such a creative person. So you just get the ideas.
I suppose it is. Yeah.
And also, like, what was the difference between writing a memoir and like completely coming up with your own imaginative story? Like, was there some sort of writing difference?
Definitely. I guess complete relief would be the first thing. Uh, as I said earlier, I took a little bit of artistic license with the memoirs, uh, but you still have to remain true to fact. You can't wander off on tangents. You can't sort of retell thoughts that maybe you didn't have. You can't embellish the weather. You can't, you know, it has to be factual. And to sit down and write fiction, pure fiction, is very liberating. You know, and just when you're allowed to run wild, to create situations, you know, as a reader, these things are happening in real time for you. You know, if a particular character buries himself in an impossible situation, or they have the perfect line at the perfect moment, it seems so spontaneous and fantastic to the reader, but it's been well planned out. And I mean, that's the advantage of writing fiction. You're not confined to what actually happened.
I like not confining to reality, so that must have been a revelation. Yeah, so you also have upcoming books, like the first one is Blood and Brown Sugar. So how has the experience been writing it?
Well, Blood and Brown Sugar is my first full length fiction release, full novel, uh, and it was a wonderful experience. Um, it was trying, and I think it was probably uh, a lot more involved than I realized at the outset. Uh, you know, there were ups and downs, and being my first novel, I was going in completely blind. You know, I didn't know the proper path to follow. I'm a bit of a pantster, really. I just write. I don't plan too much, which twists me up in knots. You know, during the second edit, you've got to go back and fix all the problems you've created for yourself. But it's how I write. It's how I'm most creative. So I found that that experience, going through that experience the first time, was while very painful, it was also quite liberating and wonderful. The experiences of reaching the top of the mountain when you finally finish that first draft are, you know, it evokes some feelings that I'd never really felt before. It was a great experience.
Could you tell us more about the book? Like, what's it about? A small blur.
Well, yeah, sure. Write what you know, right? And so, Blood and Brown Sugar is based around a young man from Canada, young Canadian, who inadvertently becomes involved with a motorcycle club in Montreal, indebted to them, and through that sort of indebtment, he finds himself in India, having to escort a shipment of heroin back to Canada for the club. Um, I don't want to give anything away, but
Okay.
it's
No spoilers,
it's
please.
yeah, obviously it's a crime thriller, and it starts you know, starts in Montreal and sort of fluctuates back and forth between Montreal then Delhi, Montreal then Udaipur, Montreal then Vapi, Maharashtra, Goa. You know, as he rides, he's being pursued by the NCB, and you know, a lot of these experiences or things that he's experiencing, the routes that he takes, the dabas he eats in, the hotels he stays in. You know, I've been there. These are actual places. They exist. You know,
I think
so
that's a huge advantage of being a traveler. Like, you don't have to think a lot about the setting of the book. You have already been there.
Absolutely. There was a novel I read when I was young, and I think this is where I've picked up um, my need for realism, even in my fiction. A novel called Deathwind, and it was about a virus. It was in the early '80s, I believe. But the character, it was also released under the title The Last Canadian. It was an American written novel, but it's about this pandemic that basically wipes out the earth. And the main character is trapped in Canada, up north in Canada at the time, and he walks back down into the United States to get home. And during this part of the journey, he actually walked right through my hometown, and not more than 400 or 500 meters from where I lived. And the description and the detail in those passages, it made the hair on my neck stand up. And I think that's what's embedded my need to be realistic even within my fiction.
Yes. So it is always easier to stick to places you already know than creating a whole new place for yourself. So would you like to like shift genres sometime to maybe fantasy sometime, create new words?
It's it's funny you say that. I was having a conversation with my wife about that very thing actually not too long ago. How um, when I write, I tend to write in real time, um, and present situations, and where I am, I make it as realistic as possible. And although I have been known to uh, completely blow up a city and rebuild it, I mean, if you're sitting in a restaurant in Hyderabad and you name that restaurant, then your description of the napkins better be real, and the street that it's on. However, if you invent an entirely new restaurant, then you're free to do whatever you wish. So, I mean, you can intermingle the two, you know. Um, as far as switching genre and building an entire new world, I don't know if I don't know if I have that in me, to be honest. I mean, I'd love to maybe write about, pirates or or
Right.
something of that nature. But I think just by the way that I write, I find myself grounded back in actual places and times. I'm actually doing research now for a novel that's going to take place at the end of World War One in India, in Calcutta. Uh, and I don't know if you're familiar with that time. I mean, the Spanish flu was happening at that time. There was the tensions between the Britishers and the Indians were really at a boiling point. It was a really interesting time in India's history. And I first had the thought or the idea for this novel. The premise came to me months and months ago, but I've been doing an awful lot of research because I want to get it right. I want to get the flavor right. I need to know that not just the political climate, but where people were living, what was happening, what the weather was like. I mean, I want it to be as close to possible, as close to reality as possible, despite the fact that it's going to be a completely fictitious story.
Yeah. No, I mean, Indians are also very emotionally attached to that period of time, Indian independence struggle. So they would want to have a realistic setting also. Yeah.
Yes,
So
absolutely, absolutely.
your book actually, Blood and Brownshire, was actually a huge genre shift for you also. Like you haven't written any crime thrillers as such before. So was there any difference in setting up the story?
There was, yeah, it was writing in the first person in the memoirs was one thing. Like I said, sort of recounting actual events. So that was a whole separate thing. My short stories tend to lean a little more towards the macabre, horror, dark thriller, murders, monsters, things that go bump in the night. So the crime thriller, I found I was able to. I didn't have to be on guard as much as when I'm writing a horror, for example, and there's a werewolf or a vampire bat or whatever the case may be, you can work on sheer emotion, create terror, create drama, create the atmosphere. Writing a crime thriller, while all those things are important, you can't spin too far off of the reality map. So I found it challenging at times to keep the pace of the story moving, but keep it in real time. I found that I couldn't dip as much into the colorful backgrounds and the ominous music. You know, so it was quite different in that respect. Although it was very liberating in the way that um, the dialogue I found a lot easier to write, um, especially given the characters. They're of my ilk. You know, they're bikers. You know, I know how these people talk. I didn't have to put myself in a position of you know, a Victorian coachman or you know, a 1960s feminist, you know, peace activist, or you know,
Yeah.
I could just, the dialogue came quite easily, as well as their actions and attitudes towards things. So there were ups and downs, just sort of switching genre, but I'm very comfortable in it. I'm actually I'm writing a sequel to it as well, which should be, the first draft should be done this month, actually. So I mean, it just logically flowed. I guess if I'm being honest, I find writing the crime thriller easier. Came to me a little easier than maybe horror or horror fiction.
Yeah, I wish you best of the luck for the all the books you will release in the future.
Thank you.
And yeah, so I've seen a lot of pictures on LinkedIn where you have done extensive research and you go to extreme lengths to write a story. Like I saw a photo of you with a snake. Yeah. So how does that come?
But the snake, I don't know. We were just having a beer and somebody said, give him a kiss. So I did, you know. Um, uh, Again, yeah, it's just my nature. Wherever, wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, um, I try to view it as an experience, and I like to lock those experiences away and analyze them later through a writer's eye. Um, at the moment, wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, I generally take things in broad strokes, and I don't analyze it too much. It's not until later, you know, I think, wow, you know, like I rode my bike down NH1 through Kashmir, the Kashmir Valley, you know, in the winter, you know, and at the time I was just more concentrating keeping my tires on the ground and not off the side of the cliff. You know, it's not until later that you sort of look at it with a writer's eye and you think, wow, that could really, I could really turn that into something people might enjoy reading.
So, what would your advice be for aspiring writers and creatives?
Mm. A couple of things that jump to mind. I think it's a long road. Pack a lunch. You know, it's not.
Yes.
We've all become somewhat accustomed to watching writers in the movies, you know, hit the end key and pull out that sheath of paper, put it on the stack beside them. That's it. Their book's done. You know, that's not the case. It's a long, hard road, and it's well worth it. But be prepared for that. Don't be grounded and know that it's a tough haul, but you're going to be rewarded for it. I guess one of the most common things I see in the writing groups and so forth that I'm involved with, uh, young writers say, you know, I'm getting bogged down in this scene, or I can't finish this chapter, or I've run out of talent, or, you know, and inevitably, I think it's the biggest mistake young writers make is they try to edit as they go. When they sit down to their first draft, whether they've planned it out well or they're more of a pantser like myself, they try to edit as they go. They want to finish with the finished product. They want to complete that novel with the finished product. And that's just not the way to go. You just write your first draft. It's supposed to be horrible. Trust me, it's okay. Don't overthink it. Don't reread it. Don't correct your spelling. Just get it on paper. That's if if you don't want to absolutely tear up and throw away your first draft at least 4 times, you're doing it wrong. So just stick with it and get it on paper first. Third draft, that's where you can really dig into it. You know, there's lots of drafts coming that you can fix the mistakes.
I think
Um,
that advice will actually be useful for me because I did the same thing.
just get it out, just spew it out, and read. You know, as we were speaking about earlier, read. It's you can't write without being a reader. And every experience that you have, uh, lock it away, store it, look at it through view it through a writer's eye. Read as much as you can. Don't just. I actually just found myself the other day. I read a colleague of mine just released a short story, and it was based on Mary, Mother Mary, um, uh, Jesus' crucifixion, based through from her point of view. And that's really far removed from something that I would generally read. But as it was a colleague, I said, yeah, sure, I'll read it. I'd love to read it. And it was fantastic. It was fantastic. So you read as much as you can, and don't pigeonhole yourself into specific genres. Don't just read horror. Don't just read dystopian fantasy. Don't just read mysteries. Explore. There's so much out there. And if you yourself want to write, the more exposure you have to different genres, different styles, the better.
So we are running out of time. So one last question. What do you see in the future for yourself as a writer? Like maybe in 10 more years.
Well, I'm not going to stop now. As I said, that my first novel is coming out this summer. Hot on the heels of it is going to be the sequel. I have the short stories. I have another book that I've got a lot of work lined up, and I'm headed in that direction. I think I've done so many things throughout my life. I've had a lot of careers. I sort of chose the school of learning through experience rather than academia, and this is what I've settled on. I'm just going to continue to write and hopefully make a lot of people happy with my stories.
Yes, I wish you all the best with every one of your projects in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for giving us your time today. It was an absolute honor talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me, and congratulations to you and BANAFEST 2021.
Thank you so much. Yes.